Resolving conflict in a relationship is probably one of the most important skills that we can learn, because conflict in any relationship is inevitable, no matter how wonderful, how harmonious at times. But there's always going to conflict will always arise. That's a guarantee. How we deal with the conflict is another story. There are people who get into explosive fights, and then there are people who shut down and won't communicate at all, and just withhold. But either way, there's a lot of pain created on both parties, and so I think learning how to resolve the conflict is absolutely essential. And an important thing to know about when we fight, when we get triggered, when we enter into a conflict, what happens is we usually are triggered and go into a fight or flight response, and that reptilian brain where we're reacting from our oftentimes our negative coping strategies that we learned from childhood. These very primitive, very primal places. And you think about primal and primitive, it's all about survival. So anytime the threat of abandonment, or the threat that someone is going to uh, bust through your boundaries or consume you or overwhelm you, is just as threatening to some people as the threat of someone leaving, depending on what your background, what your history is, where your wounding is. But again, I think what most couples do is get triggered and want to resolve it right away and engage. And I think that's the worst thing you can do. I think it's important to recognize one or both of you is in a fragmented state and in the limbic fight or flight emotional brain, where you don't really have access to the rational, practical part of the brain. So, that autonomic nervous system response, the fight or flight, is what gets us in trouble, because again, we're acting from very primitive skills, not thought out, not taking the pause to get the emotion down, and learning to see your part, take ownership, and then be able to even apologize when necessary, or be able to speak rationally, calmly, and get into a productive dialogue about the situation or the conflict. But the important thing is to not fight.